So I hope you can all help me out with questions.
Yeah, so you come over here. So we'll, just because that way I can have an image in you front of what ends up being a microphone. So I want to welcome everyone back to Green Street after Caitlin Rockman's opening last night. Basically, I want to remind you guys that the reason we do these talks is so you can ask the questions while you're thinking of them, and if that means interrupting or stopping us when we're talking about a certain phase of the work or a technique or an idea that's involved with the work, just there's no hand raising. Just ask the questions as they come up, because it's hard to keep the thought till the end of the talk or something like that. So this is really an exchange, and it's more of a gallery walkthrough than a formal artist talk. So my job is to remind you of all the brilliant things you've said in your studio when we're talking about the work, and to ask the questions with everyone else here that I think the work naturally brings up itself. So anyway, thank you for coming, and this is Caitlin, who will open up with some comments just on how this work fit into the body of work that she had been working on before this. So thanks for coming.
So how it fitted in with the earlier work? Okay.
Or just this is the first piece out of the series, correct? Is it
Yeah.
earlier than all the drawings, oil paintings?
Yes, this is the earliest work, and I began by taking photographs of some plastic female action hero figurines that I started collecting. I came across them accidentally at the house of a friend, and initially I was interested in how their bodies are so feminine and sort of idealized and exaggerated, and they're carrying all these weapons, and they're obviously ready for some kind of battle, and there's an element of power involved, but then the contrast to their bodies, it's sort of ridiculous. Obviously they're not going to win any battles with those skinny arms and wearing bathing suits. Anyway, so that was sort of what got me interested in these figurines, how ridiculous they were in a sense. And I guess the way it relates to my earlier work, which I'll just quickly describe, those pieces were large paintings of clothes from catalogs that had the sense of the body inside the clothes, but the body wasn't present. And some of the ideas in that earlier work were fashion and trying to project the self in the outer world, and how your body sort of with clothes, you're carrying around a personality on your body, and not being very articulate right now. I'm getting lost with my own thoughts, but they're pretty much about the body and outward appearance, and then how power and vulnerability has a lot to do with how we show ourselves in public and how we feel inside and how we express that on the body. So there's a little bit of a transition into this work. And
the scale of those pieces relates, I feel.
Yeah,
they were very scaled, but they ended up really large.
Yeah, about 8 feet tall by 3.5 feet wide.
And how, I think that the power vulnerability thing that you mentioned, how much does the scale, you had to blow them up out of catalog scale, and these are bigger than life size. Does that body thing make them need to be a certain scale?
I don't have, it wasn't a conceptual thought that they should be this big. It was really organic. I like to work big. It feels right to me. Somehow, this is, in a way, these are sort of alter egos for me a little bit, as well as objects of desire, and they feel right big. I didn't consciously think they have to be big because it is about power and it is sort of larger than life. It just sort of happened that way. I found when I was working on the mylar paintings that I also had to work big. Initially I started by tracing out of catalogs directly, and that scale just didn't feel right, so I started working big. But strangely enough, what I did in this was have to work really small in order to get big. I spent so much time in one corner, you know, days and days and days on one little, you know, on one area. So even though I felt like I was working on something big and that felt right to me, I was actually always focusing on a very small thing.
Do you, I think that brings up an interesting kind of connection between these, the fact that they were underclothed and the whole clothing thing. I mean,
Yeah.
I think the identity of the person in the clothes is the thing I've been thinking about mostly, but now it actually, I think that makes an interesting logical kind of leap between your work. It's like, not at any point will we put those clothes from the catalog on these scantily clad
Yeah.
superheroes, because they obviously have powers that, you know, make them be able to vanquish enemies while looking good doing it, you know. It's kind of a, so as far as that kind of level of focus, you had talked about, I mean, I think it's almost impossible to avoid talking about, you know, the amount of time and your focus on these pieces for such a long period of time. Do you, when you're making your initial decisions, when you were let's talk about the next piece that you got to. When you're composing the kind of the painting and the camera,
Yeah.
does this look very much like the initial kind of photograph that you felt would make a good painting? How much adjustment kind of happens between those two things?
Well, what I did was photograph the the figurines, and all the composing happens in that initial photography. The lighting.
So you stay pretty true to what you capture that way?
I set them up. I used backcloths, the angle, the lighting. I was trying to capture both a sense of a narrative that was happening outside of the frame, a sort of a feeling of movement, action, something's about to happen, something's just happened, a sense of power, dynamic feeling, and also, where possible, a sort of sense that this character is vulnerable. And I didn't really know what that meant. I didn't really know what I meant by vulnerable. It was just something that was sort of interesting to me. And I tried to feel it out as I was composing in the camera. And then that image is what I played around with in Photoshop. So the composition never changed from that moment. What did change was, in Photoshop, was the extent to which the three-dimensional form became abstracted into these bits and pieces. And the color changed. I played around with colors. And then that image I printed out and then projected that. And all the lines, basically all of the lines from that digitized image were projected onto the canvas. But then the next stage in painting, there's a lot of change going on too, a lot of decisions about color again. I wasn't true to the shapes. Sometimes I was a little true, sometimes I fudged it as I was painting.
The shapes inside the figure?
The actual shapes from the digitized image. To some degree they're really true, and sometimes they're not. In the process of projecting, there's a lot of sort of inexactness happening, and in my hand also. You know, it took hours and hours and hours to do that, and at some point at many points I was getting a little tired, so my lines weren't quite straight, and
kind of the nature of abstraction right there.
Yeah, so in each stage there was a certain amount of the hand sort of taking over.
Refictionalizing.
Exactly.
Well, that's funny to think. One of the more frequent comments that people had when they got to see these in person the first time was how, you know, impossible it is to make them read correctly on the postcard or on the computer, which is weird because we're putting this through a couple of other iterations that actually bring the cycle all the way back around to, you know, it's you taking the computer and the camera to abstract this, and then I'm taking a picture of it and putting it back on the computer. So I thought that was kind of, you know, the pixelization. You don't know whether I did a bad job of, you know, kind of doing the image on the computer or whether you'd enlarged it too big or something. So, you know, that at least 4 or 5 times last night to people that were really impressed with the work, they're saying, you know, this doesn't really do it justice. I was like, well, you know, it rarely does, you know, or we'd be making, you know, in photography, I think you can come pretty close to having a printed image that that looks like it on glossy paper, but it was really both the issue of scale, but even when I zoom in and show a detail, what you got to happen in this paint. And when you use a variety of paints, is acrylic the paint that has to be used for this because of how you work with it, or is it the color?
These are all acrylic, and I use golden fluid acrylics because they are fluid. I wanted I wanted the ability to work really finely and not have brush strokes. And so there are many, many layers to each piece because the paint is so thin, about 5 or 6 layers to each area.
That's so that it
has a smooth feeling, and also I wanted to work with something that dries quickly so that I could make decisions really quickly and change. And because I was learning a lot about color as I was doing this, and discovering that color looks completely different in where I was mixing my colors and when I put it on the canvas, and then depending on what's next to it, of course, just continually changing, and so it had to be as fast a process as possible.
How much of your process, would you spend a tremendous amount of time in those little areas, kind of in that micro world before you would step back, or did you do a lot of back and forth, or is that a problem that brought in the spectacle issue?
I don't know how much back and forth these painters do,
think it's
but
different than,
I don't really know. I didn't step back a whole lot. I don't think I had to. I'd spent most of my time up close. But walking around my studio doing other things throughout the day, I always saw it. It was always there. So in a way, I was sort of looking without intently looking from a distance.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have some of you folks may probably saw some of your earlier work. I guess I'm struck with two things. I'm really interested in this sort of paradigm shift, which is so obvious on one level, which is the shift from some much earlier work. And I'm thinking explicitly of the more architectural juicer piece. Mm-hmm. And that piece, in a way, is about, Bachelard's discussing sort of intimate immensity, or immense intimacy. There's a very interesting piece there. That piece relates very much to these. It's so close, it's outrageous, and it appears so far. And I'm struck with the fact that these are deconstruction and reconstruction. Yeah. But there's a real clarity in them, and the clarity is almost by having your nose in it, literally. And you kept this kind of luscious, super skin quality. But there's a kind of disfiguration because of pixelizations. And it's interesting, with the juice piece, it appears one way, not just psychologically, but actually you are going into a kind of emotional territory with the juicer piece that looks very intimate, but it's an immense issue you're dealing with. And then here, it almost is the opposite. It looks immense, but it's incredibly intimate. I like that shift, and I'm very interested in the fact of where it places me, the viewer. That would be another one. So the shift for me is very different. You've deconstructed this in a way. It feels aberrant. There's a kind of clarity in its honesty in a way. Very different piece in the kind of seduction that's going on, but also beyond the seduction to a kind of intimacy. I know I didn't give you a question, but I wanted to get to a question. I couldn't quite get there. But
okay.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do.
That's a very pivotal piece. You and I discussed this in detail at one point when you did that first juicer. What was the other piece of box?
Oh, it was a large silver juicer from sort of a hand-cranked juicer from a catalog, I think Pottery Barn.
Yeah, when it comes down, when the female form comes down, but but it looked like it could have been a mechanical drawing. Yeah, very oversized, but it was rendered too. It had that sense of rendering, but it had that touch. You've maintained the touch here, but you've given it up to the pixelization, but you put the touch back into it.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of, it's not just a more postmodern way of looking at it, but it's actually past that in a way, because you've also sexually charged it back all over again. And so I'm interested in that, the way the body is actually coming through this piece again, surviving, and where it takes me psychologically.
It's interesting that both of those and her connection with the consumerism is kind of like why that's being used to sell us things.
Right.
Why
question.
this is a popular way to make a figurine that lots of people will respond to. Why the shiny chrome, old fashioned juicer is replacing the little white Cuisinart spinny thing that, is kind of the retro.
Yeah.
But I don't know how the retro and this hook up, but I think the idea of...
Well, I think they do, because this is a goddess figure too, and it's a certainly different kind, but it's a goddess figure for sure.
Well, honestly,
the retro that I was thinking of, I just realized this a while ago. I had a friend that collected photographs of all of the stills from early movies about space exploration, where guys were on a planet and
Barbarella.
They had all of these, breathing apparatus, and the women who were just scantily clad.
Of course.
They could live without all of this apparatus.
And men liked it better in general also.
In general. And I just really was connecting, these two periods. That was the 40s and 50s. That's 50 years ago. And that whole sense of, the unclad female body and the pose in which it's put in. And the difference between that and the questions about it and this, where I think what you said was actually very, beautifully put, very subtle. That's almost not the issue in a way. And that's an enormous transcendence to take that form, which begs the issue, and then subjugate it.
I think it gets run over in the conversation today as if it's either vagina envy or it's something. I mean, I'm reading this morning in Papua New Guinean sexual practices this breaking down the theory that these men who are cutting their penises, that this is vagina envy. It's actually not. It's actually about power. And I think that this sort of begs some questions in that arena about sexualized female power. It's not that simple. And I don't take it that way here at all. Actually, you're cutting into another place there that I think is much more interesting. And I think that's the piece that subconsciously and emotionally, and it's happening in a lot of ways. That they're, of course, they're delicious to look at and they're very seductive. And you're not going to give that up, as you're not going to give the skin up in the other pieces. The skin of the piece, because that charges it to death. I mean, it's incredibly powerful. But I think you are actually getting at something else. And in a way, I guess, maybe I sound like the old teacher here or something, but you're actually going to the deeper level. And it's a different step. And it's dislocating. And I do want to say that. I think it is very dislocating because of all the myriad of people that come to the conversation. That's the piece in a way. But the other piece didn't allow as much space.
That's true.
You're allowing a bigger, deeper audience to read them and misread them, but at least you're seducing us all into looking at it. Right?
And
Perhaps
paying
that's
attention to
They are.
avoid, like when I had some reference to feminism or a feminist kind of version of something that we were used to saying a different way, you wanted to very specifically avoid bringing that
Just that.
singular
baggage right in there.
And that's what they do
because
at
it
that
can
point.
have a tendency to take over.
And you were saying, well, the consumer side of that I wouldn't mind talking about, but I'm not comfortable having the conversation shift to be about that empowerment versus power.
Yeah.
And I thought that was showing like the fact that while there's an acknowledgement that that's bound to be in here everywhere, how you want to kind of keep the dialogue and keep us at what surface level. I mean, it's like a physical thing in a way where you're asking us to go up really close to this thing that's moving toward us in an unidentifiably powerful way, but we got to go up here and look at these little things. It's like, it's like when somebody's up here looking really closely at this thing and you look at it from across the room, it's kind of like, careful! It's like you're...
Pig.
Along with that, can you talk about, you're talking about the source, where it's come from, and then the content, but also kind of more obviously you're initially struck with just that there's the digital aspect and it's digitized, and how did that change? Why did you start putting it through that lens, or how did that change your conception of your subject matter, or were those layers, how did those layers affect, was that giving you distance from the subject matter? Did it make you feel differently, or? Like, where did the content?
You know, it wasn't, I know exactly what you're trying to get at, and the only answer I have, I think I don't have that answer for myself yet. The answer I do have is that it was completely intuitive. I was really just playing around. And the only concept that I was initially trying to understand for myself was power and vulnerability as two opposites, and where do they meet? Where do they support each other? How can they be embodied in the same thing? What does it say about me? And I knew that I was basically exploring with the work and not really coming up with any answers, and just continuing to be intuitive about every step of the process. And in terms of the intimacy that David is talking about, I think that's maybe where some of the effect of the intimacy comes from, because in many points I wanted to nail down what the concept was, and I wanted to be able to do that, partly because at certain points in my schooling I was told that you should sometimes,
Not
you
by
know,
David.
and
Not by David.
not from David at all, not at all. Mostly from some of my peers, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which
is a reasonable question.
Yeah, and it's an interesting question, and there's a lot to learn from being able to answer that question and discovering in yourself whether or not that's how you work. Are you concept-driven, and at what point do you let the concept go or let it govern what you're doing? And for me, I discovered, despite every intention to try and be more conceptually driven, I couldn't. It just wasn't right. So it was very intuitive.
Sometimes you find the concept afterwards. You know you have to make a piece, and then you invent
Yeah.
and
I think
layer
you
it
are,
all.
in fact.
Yeah.
It's not about that.
Yeah.
It's just not how you go on the journey. I think
And yeah.
that's the issue.
And so part of the intimacy for me is, well, being close to it, really working closely and spending hours and hours and hours on small spaces over and over again. I found myself just losing myself, not thinking, just being there, doing it, and that was a really wonderful experience. And making the decisions really intuitively, and but then also discovering things in the work that I didn't expect to find, layers and layers of meaning, layers of content that I hadn't really intended to be there, that just started coming out. And because I spent about a year on each piece over the course of the year, and even now I'm discovering things that I didn't know were really part of it, that as I look back, I realize, of course, that makes sense. That's part of me, that's a part of what I was thinking at that time, that's a part of what was happening in the world, that's a part of what I was being affected by. It's somehow in there, and I'm still discovering it for myself.
Is like seeing a cityscape like where you used to live, an example
Yeah.
of one of those.
Yeah, the landscape in particular started coming out unexpectedly, the aerial landscapes, and I sort of fell in love with bits and pieces of it and really stayed there, started to just imagine things like little forests and mountains and sunsets, and then pieces of this area reminded me of an aerial view of one of the islands where I grew up, sort of atolls and islands and beaches and water, and there's a lot more actually in the other painting if you want
Might
to.
be a good time for us
but-
to walk in there. Thanks. That's
Yeah.
usually my job to come up with the segue. But, it's interesting to have, with Ai and Danielle's work is photo-based, or has some of it is, and she's also, both of them deal with that kind of scale jump. So that's actually kind of interesting to have some questions from that exact same kind of studio practice. Let me see if I can get this in a position where.
I love this.
All right.
Thanks.
So I-
This is the last one.
Is it?
This one, this was the most interesting for me to work on. What I enjoyed about it was how the figure, the body and the background, what was important to me, what I was actually working towards, it's not exactly a concept, but what I was working towards was playing with the separation between the body and the background and trying to blur the lines a little bit so that it wasn't as easily recognizable as in this one over here and the one on the other side. I like the fact that it's a little more challenging to understand the figure. At this point, it's a bit hard for me to be objective about it. When people were coming over to my studio at various points in the production of this one, pretty much nobody could see the figure. It was very, very hard for people to see the figure, and it was really only in the last month that it popped out. Mostly because the final work was the eyes, the green eyes. Yeah, and for some reason, I mean, I don't know what you all see, but I think that now the figure's a little bit easier to recognize than earlier on. And what I enjoyed was playing around with the fact that it's not, she's twisted, so one of her arms is missing, one of her shoulders is missing, the breastplates, which are actually skulls, are very exaggerated, and her face is hardly a face. Of all the figurines that I collected, this is the one that had the least human-like facial features. And then this section here on the figurine is actually a sort of a skeletal weapon that's attached to the shoulder behind her head, and it has a kind of an arrow that projects from it, but it looks like the skeleton of a horse, or it's hard to say what it is. And then in the abstraction through Photoshop, and then again through the painting, it's hard to tell what it is. So yeah, it's a bit difficult to understand. But for me, I like playing with the complexity of the relationship between the background and the figure. And then there's a lot of landscape in here that I've been discovering that I'm really enjoying. For example, if you turn your head and look at this area sideways, and yeah, to me it looks like a little citadel on a hill somewhere in I don't know, Italy, could be, with the sun. And then I recently noticed that these white areas here remind me very much of the Moorish architecture on the island of Ibiza.
Or even from here, or other action figures or architecture. And back here, especially with or without my glasses, they have that quality too. They imply architecture as body or body as architecture. Can I go back to contents for a little bit?
Yeah.
I'm very interested in two collisions again for me. One is that if we sort of put a couple of things together, not that we could agree or disagree about it, but I think if in fact we are the sum of all the people we've ever known that Elie Wiesel speaks about, and if much of what we do, if not all of what we do, is autobiographical, there's a sense, and if we collect that with the piece about you as documentarian and as a critic, because you are making judgments and making observations about culture, construction of our culture as women and men and human beings. All of those things scrambled up, and if we shake them out here, I see them in this painting. And so I'm not what's that?
That's a compliment.
So I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that it is a commentary for me as an action figure. I see the figure, but in fact it is us. I mean, I take it very personally as a viewer. You seem to be allowing me in, not as a commentator the same way as some earlier work. This is much broader, it's much more obscure, but it doesn't seem obscure for its own sake. And so I'm interested in this figure. I see this figure as death. I see this figure as absolute regeneration and dislocation. And I don't feel like it's a puzzle here. This is a map. I'm looking at the map of the United States here. It's kind of a funny map of the United States, but doesn't it look like a map of the United States a little bit, but maybe the South got exaggerated or something.
That was the Louisiana Purchase.
Right. But this idea of this, and even this funny phallus in the middle of it. I mean, I love this whole map with this sort of hope or little, lingam or a shrine or something in the middle of it. And I'm projecting, but I guess
here?
Right in the middle, because it's up higher, right there.
Yeah.
So there's what I don't feel here is an artificial construction. I absolutely believe you. I'm not sure yet what I believe in the sense that it's not all tacked down tight. And I guess that's what I'm really saying. There's an ambiguity in here of what in some of the earlier work that wasn't as clear. This is more ambiguous, but I feel clear about how I get into it and where I can go as a viewer. Is that making sense?
Clearer ambiguity.
Is that
what you're
yeah, I'm saying clear, meaning I feel like I feel all of those issues that you've been stringing us along with for quite a long time now, but I feel like the figure is, you are telling me more. Is that would be a better way to say that. I feel like the death piece here is much stronger. There's a death of a body when you take the body out and you blow it up and make it look like it's, you know, Britney Spears' breasts hanging out of it and they're not there. This is very different. And I feel much more thoughtful in looking at them.
It's
I'm
interesting
sorry, it's
that
a
it
long way to
also
say that.
it also
No,
brings
thank
up
you.
questions about the source, like
And the
good
source.
guy, bad guy.
Right, exactly. Thank
But
you.
one of the things that came up when Dave was mentioning in the other room about, and fundamentally when you bring up kind of what you were looking at before, and the odd way these figures or heroes are kind of pictured, and that is like the idea of a costume, the idea of a superhero or something like that can. Basically, one of the things, in addition to being vulnerable, is that it's an official superhero Barbarella costume. It's like Superman.
It's the public persona.
Yeah, the masculinized side of it has that too. Like Superman goes into the booth and takes his clothes off and walks around in long underwear, but because it has a big seal on it and we recognize it as super costume, it's almost got like it's like got this. Part of the power is that suit. I mean, Alfred used to always have to handily have just made Batman's suit acid proof the week before, so that when you get dipped by the penguin in the acid, you know. But so I think our culture kind of like knows that there are secret bulletproof. You know, I think Wonder Woman had those arm bands that could ricochet bullets. Was she standing there without kind of a shield or anything, wearing a happening, skirt and a bustier, but she's bulletproof.
I think she could have been naked, James. I think it still would have worked.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think some of the, what you're looking at with the costume and, this one, the skull, the bad guy, or more death-like, they're definitely still confrontational. You don't know where, I feel like in the other room, the figure's coming past me to defend me against something, because she represents kind of this good thing. And
Almost
this
through
one's
you, though.
this was kind of a runaway thing. And again, as a viewer in the space, the fact that they're so close, they're cropped, that they're actually in, I mean, you could easily be getting hit by or protected by them just in the comfortable distance you are to view them.
But
And
then
so
back to
that's
back is
really-
what I really love. The other piece, you just said it, actually goes through you as an experience because of the ephemerality of the marks and the layering. This is not the same. This is dangerous.
Everything's the edges of everything.
All of the marks suggest that, sure. So I think that's I love that you would do those pieces in concert with each other. That's actually, they work independently, but that's the piece that I really like. This one has a kind of violence and a kind of topographical shift that the other one doesn't have. The other one has a kind of a different seduction, but it's very, it's more in my intellectual space and in my senses. Whereas this one, I feel, has got, it's got the weight there in a different way. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
The other one it's more rhetorical in
Right.
the sense that this one, it's interesting because my reading of this on the right is an enormous skeletal cage. My first reading was of the dinosaurs in the museum. So as I keep looking at it, it's sort of this transformation, retransformation. And the fact that the center, that the United States, because of the value and the hue of it, just keeps jumping up.
Yeah.
It really,
Like it leaves
it's constantly moving. It's constantly, to me, shifting the figures back and forth, who's coming from whom and who's going where. But it's also a little disorienting in a good way because it's not predictable.
Yeah.
So
And that's the kind of use of the airbrush, that edge that, with this one, you're applying more of that pixelation in the background, which is one of the things that makes it shift more. There was that stair step kind of smooth, kind of map of the ocean depths feeling in the other one. And this one, you've got it, but even when you do it, it gets some edge work on it.
Yeah.
But those areas and the other piece in this one, there's a huge contradiction or contrast between these things that there is no diagonal or curved line. It's either going horizontally or vertically. And the airbrush, and then also the kind of culture of the airbrush versus the pixel versus those
The hand
painted,
yeah.
and both you're hand painting both of them, and they're both represented in a Photoshop filter airbrush or palette knife or
yeah, palette knife.
So, I mean, did you use airbrush before these paintings in anything?
No, it's the first time I.
So you learned it
I learned how to
because
use
you knew you
airbrush.
needed that edge. You wanted to use that line.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So you took up a new sport.
All of this was new, actually. Yeah.
what was your feeling about the hand and the visibility or non-visibility of the hand?
I thought that I was challenging myself to eliminate the visibility of the hand, but still have the human touch to it. The visibility of the brush, but to still feel my feeling in painting it there. Because I think there's a way in which historically we've been told that to see the brushwork is to see the feeling of the painter. That is one symbol of feeling and expression, and it seemed limiting to me. I wanted to see what I could do to broaden the understanding of expression and feeling for the painter and the viewer beyond the brushwork.
Well, that's funny because I thought the most ironic filter you could have chosen is palette knife. I mean, you go to great lengths
out of a sense of humor because I only chose that filter.
It couldn't be any, and that is the kind of painting that you almost resent how present the hand of the viewer is. Like, but at the same time, you're like, wow, it's amazing with that limitation. If you want to look at it that way, that you can get the detail.
It's incredible. I mean, that they do evoke such intense emotion, and that they are like, it's amazing all the things that you're reconciling, and that yet I feel like nothing is over articulated, or like with all the color and all the specificity and detail, I never feel like, while I can sort of get into specific areas and kind of, it's illusionistic, when I come back, it always is just enough that it's staying still to the image or the content. I mean, it's never too much of the color or whatever. It's still always staying.
It keeps saying, "Move along, please."
Yeah.
Move along, please. Instead of you being able to spend any time on that thing that we're all talking about how well that works, but at the same time, it's like you've got this right there to make sure it doesn't. It's bold to put something like that in the middle of a composition.
It has a really unique sort of art historical spot it occupies, because there's a very old absence of hand, and then there's this whole many centuries of finding the individuality in the hand, but to curve back again using this kind of extraordinary technology, it's very interesting, because it really is part of a very big cycle.
One of the things as you're saying that, I'm thinking the piece that has been in your work, but it seems to be increasing, is the issue of time. And this, because you could talk indefinitely about the kind of technical aspects of shifts. They are important, they're interesting, but I think that the construction of the painting, or the way that it appears, the phenomenology of the painting is that it speaks of time. There's a romantic notion here. There's a kind of history that it feels like. There's a kind of a geography in the map of the painting that feels very much like it's becoming or was. I can make the illusion that this is, I'm going to go back to America there, but that this is the Bering Strait, or there's something about, and I think what you said before about the bones, is something really skeletal with a piece on the right, but I'm not sure if this figure, as we sit here for 20 minutes looking at it, it becomes more and more, it keeps becoming as we start to see it. And then it also fades. I mean, it can fade away in an instant. But I do think that there is a kind of, in memory, that you are evoking in the piece. And I'm now using this piece to key looking at the other pieces about time, actually recording time and thinking about ancient history and now, my own existence, your own existence, and what it means to be human. From that bones. There's a piece from Arctic Dreams that Barry Lopez spoke about when he speaks about being the tundra, and he talks about looking at his own fire, and underneath that fire literally is a fire from the 1850s in the ice, and under that are dinosaur bones. This has that kind of almost Inuit feeling in a very interesting way that I thought of emotionally, but I hadn't sort of articulated until you said about the bones, and I feel like that has
And
that
the
kind
skulls,
of
like,
archaic,
gosh,
that real
that's,
archaic
it's like
sense.
futuristic and
Right.
Goya.
Yeah,
But it's
exactly.
also Caitlin's transcontinental
Yeah.
Right,
life,
right.
these
Right.
two continents with the middle. I mean, I think that the wonderful thing about it is that it keeps proposing things.
That's right.
And the new things you see don't replace the first or second or fourth thing you saw, but just layer on top.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that there's a
balance
lot
it.
of communication going on, a lot. And it goes, but I think the issue of time, personally, and in a sense of human
Yeah.
experience and history, it's very interesting. This is more to talk about. This is more to sit here and ponder.
Yeah.
The other one's
And-
more visceral.
Mhm.
She's coming after you.
Yeah.
You know, get out of the way or go with it. But this one really invites a lot of response, intellectual and emotional response.
David, a friend of mine recently started thinking about these three together in a similar way, and I had never really thought about it, but she mentioned that the first one was sort of like a birth, fire at the beginning of the earth, of life, and this second one, I think there's a Buddhist story about Eve being pulled into the world, or the world being pulled by a serpent. I don't know the full story, but she started talking about that, and then this adds death also, a kind of death and rebirth. So
Is that the
Good. Well,
chronology?
that's great.
yeah, the chronology is this one first, that one
Great.
second, and this
Oh,
one
that's
last.
fabulous. Fabulous.
And in terms
Yeah.
of the length of time it took you to make them,
Uh,
was it comparable for each?
Let's see, the first one took a year, but I was learning so much as I was going along. It was the hardest because I had reinvented the wheel for myself, and it was such a leap from my other work. So the learning curve was very, very steep. And
Not to
then,
mention the labeling of thousands of little Tupperware containers.
oh yeah, you know, the numbering system for the paint is pretty crazy, but
Oops, well, I'll give away a trade secret.
no, not at all.
Surprised you didn't paint
I
it.
had to create a system to create the colors, but then the second one was a little bit less than a year, and it is less paint surface than the others. But I started playing with the airbrush a lot more, and having a bit of difficulty with the actual physical airbrush. It's not easy to use, and it took a while. In fact, I did a lot of repainting in the face area in this one. I didn't really do much repainting in any of them except for that face. And then this one took about a year also, and I'm surprised it didn't take a little longer.
Well, yeah, I think you did more in that. I mean, I think it's a
Is
lot.
there-
Looks like it would be
Yeah.
more
I
time
think
consuming,
my
but you got
decision-
faster.
Yeah, my decision-making process was a little faster here. I think I learned a lot about color. Didn't have to rework much. The only reworking I did was just layers and layers of paint to get the canvas to be hidden. But my decision-making process while I'm actually working is very quick. I don't belabor things. I'm actually really confident about the choices I make. I don't have to think about it too much.
Is there any concurrency, or do you start and finish and then start the next one and finish it?
Start and finish, yeah.
Now, one of the things when we were talking about kind of this, this intensity and this you going in and working with it, I mean, I can't help but think of this kind of meticulous handwork craft thing that is, how hard something is to make, and this repetitive action that is part of a response to work that doesn't show the hand, but is really labor intensive. The
Yeah.
monochrome, Bill Thompson, you know, super bulletproof, shiny surface, and these, you know, we're balancing kind of this paint of application that doesn't show. There's no tape used, you know, that doesn't show a paintbrush anywhere, but at the same time, it both shows this labor intensity just by its scale and paint application, and at the same time,
The analogy
it's
there
beloved.
is between a good garden and a great garden.
Right.
That's
It looks like it's natural, but I guess it's the again that has its links to both consumer and feminism and the definitions of masculinity and femininity. There were artists here that used quote masculine materials and put them through a quote femininely oriented process like crocheting inner tube tie and made, you know, that was kind of the way they reconciled it.
Yeah.
So it's I think it's part of the handwork. I mean, that just seems like it's very different in the smaller scale works on paper. In the drawing, they're kind of what they're depicting, and this is really as much about how it was made
Yeah.
as what we end up looking at visually.
Yeah.
And that's a really, I think everybody's commented that the way you kind of keep those things in balance is very much the same way you keep moving the figure and the background against each other. So there's a lot of tectonics going on here, both conceptually, visually, and technically, which I think we move around nicely. I thought I was afraid we'd just talk about painting
I'm
so
sorry,
technically the whole time. So.
No, this is great. Thank you.
Have you seen the postcard show here at the museum?
No.
You have to see it.
Okay.
Because it's actually addressing these issues. How many of you have seen the
What
postcard?
show?
There's a postcard
Oh,
show.
that's
It's did you see it? Did you like it?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
There's an element there, I won't say anymore. You should
Okay.
see that show
I
because you're
will.
actually in this territory with the way Japan was both affecting and affected by other countries and other cultures. But this is exactly, it's like getting out of its own way.
Uh-huh.
And it is this issue of the hand, and some of the most exquisite postcards there, which were done as miniature paintings,
Yeah.
are just amazing, because the hand disappeared again. And of course, it's all, the craft of it is colliding with the concept, and you're actually working through that in a very interesting way, but look at them.
Okay.
That-
Yeah, I've been
it's
meaning
so
to.
fun.
Thank
Oh.
you. I've been looking forward to that show.
Yeah, it's a real nourishment.
Yeah.
I just wanted to kind of bring it all together here at the end. I mean, this piece feels like, you using that Eve analogy, it's really a lot different. It's a horizontal movement. We're kind of in the confidence of this figure, it seems like. And also it doesn't have there's no fear really in this one, like the others. It's much more wonderment and almost anime kind of a feeling, you know?
Yeah.
And that's interesting to be able to kind of have that live in there. I think this painting would feel very different without its neighbors.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
They belong together.
yeah, and that's an interesting. It's interesting that it came between the other two pieces, and that the piece that came after it was so much stronger in the muscular
Yeah.
sense of the word.
Yeah.
Help.
It's a bridge. It's also much more illustrative. It's more available and more illustrative.
It
in
is.
some ways.
Yeah.
Not as
But you
good as-
start,
It's
you
not-
start having a little bit of, is that the background? Is that part of this thing happening in him too?
It's like you had to breathe in between, in
Mhm.
a way,
Mhm.
to find a light,
Exactly.
lighter, an image.
Yeah.
With more,
Bit of
more
a keystone,
optimistic,
yeah.
more peaceful.
Yeah.
Was there a reason you made that one so deep? Out of curiosity.
Yeah, it was just the desire to reference comic books
Okay.
a little bit.
Good. This is not a test.
No, that's about it.
No, it is. It's a huge shift.
It is.
It's only less than about 3/4 of an inch or so, but it's
Yeah.
a huge shift.
It is. It's a huge shift, and it's that's a simple answer
Good.
without any further.
Yeah. It gives it objectness. It gives it actually a physical objectness that these reference much more painting in another way.
Yeah.
This represents an object as much as it does
Yeah.
like a comic book or a tableau in a very different way. You don't get it so much when obviously you're looking head on, but as soon as you actually experience it,
Yeah.
It is very visceral the way you experience it when you go.
Yeah. And it's a deeper frame also.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm such a creep.
No, you're not. It's a good question. What about, does anybody have any questions about the oils, or should we be ending?
Yeah, we could. I think that you know, as far as a way of kind of, I mean, for me, they really formed a set of characters that we kind of anticipate. We could like, when is the next group of paintings going to involve one of these guys?
Is it?
So I guess it makes sense for us to take
What
a
did the
chance.
change in materials do in terms of the imagery? How did it affect you?
I started these about a month ago. It was a very sudden, last-minute project.
This is your chance to show how fast you could make pieces.
For myself, I really needed to do something quickly because I was going a little crazy. I have a tendency to want to do something because I don't know how, and it happens all the time. Whenever there's something that I think I want to do and I really don't know how and it scares the hell out of me, then I have to do it. And when I was at the museum school, I was like a kid in a candy shop, playing around with all sorts of different media and doing tons of different things. And I knew deep inside me that I wanted to paint, but it scared the hell out of me. And I didn't really do it until my thesis year, which is sort of the wrong time to pick something up, you know. I mean, it's whatever. That's when I decided I was going to do it, and it sort of happened. And then I guess the next frontier for me was oil painting. I didn't choose not to do oil painting, it's just what happened. And so I decided I wanted to play around with it and see what it was like, and thought that these would be a good format because they're small, they're quick. I wanted to enjoy the experience of doing them quickly, reacting quickly. That's about it.
It seems like you made a big shift here.
Yeah.
This is another big shift. I think this shift is a really powerful shift because I think you are unmasking them again. The other ones, you're wrestling with them. Here, you're making another more definitive decision. You're putting the mask out there. You're changing, you're actually deconstructing the action heroes in all of us in these. And I think for me, they're just the most, they're richer in another level because they're, I start to feel even more of you. And I can't even articulate that yet. I feel you coming through them again. And I think it's 2 or 3 shifts. One is coming back to a smaller scale, interestingly enough. Because the other ones, what's not to love? You know, it's like you know, Jerry Seinfeld. Why couldn't you love him? You know, like Jerry's mother was there, or George's mother. But I think that here, there's that quality in these where the darkness that's in this one. There's a darkness running through all of them, and also this beauty. I mean, they're just delicious. They're so you could practically just bite them, and they're just gorgeous. But there's a kind of directness with the direct. I know that's an illusion. I know it's not smaller than life, but I'm going way in them. And I find that really interesting. And the kind of ghost figure that is here again. There's an awkwardness in these in a different way. If that's, I don't know if this is making sense to you. I feel another dis-ease. I feel a comfort level with the other ones. There's a dislocation again, but it's a dis-ease with these psychologically. When I came yesterday and I looked through the window and I was thinking about what this is like for someone who's either not aesthetically trained or not, just looking at them, and I'm wondering what are they thinking. I actually want to come here. I would like to.
That's why we like having them.
Absolutely. No, I want to talk to these kids that I want to know what they're seeing, because this is like McDonald's. They grow up with these action figures, but boy, this is us. I mean, and so I think there's a very interesting conversation. So the fact that you're bringing them back down in a way, closer to where they were created for manufacture, but you're relocating them so incredibly with, you're actually giving me even more information, but this...
Yeah, she's willing to let us...
Is that death in the air?
The subject of the photographs is worth the can live up to you admitting what they are. You don't have to keep that a secret.
Yeah.
And like these really, I like the way these inform those paintings.
It's both ways, but they also seem, I didn't know the sequence, these seem the furthest
Yeah.
along in the process,
Yeah.
or a kind of urgency in these.
Yeah.
In the other one, there's a mastery, but these have like an urgency, and it isn't just because they're on plywood and all of that, but even the choice of the plywood and the kind of sense of skin of the plywood, the layering of the plywood, it's all right there. It's like, wow, that's very interesting. And then you still put that damn skin on it, which is so good. Anyway, I love these. I think these are just stellar.
How long does it take you for you to do each of these pieces? Does it take you like a month for you?
No. 1, 2, 3, probably about 4 days. 4 7, 8-hour days.
With the same technical steps, and you set them up.
Oh,
and then
well, they come from photographs that I manipulated, but very differently. Just very simply, I wanted to get rid of the narrative, the background. I wanted to treat them like sort of historical portraits. Just
Yeah,
portraits
that one's
of...
like political revolutionary portrait. That's
Yeah.
every,
Right.
not to mention a cool lame kind of shiny top thing.
I know.
That's the juicer coming back in. I want to beat David
That's
to
the
that
juicer.
comment.
There you go. That's the juicer, baby.
That's interesting. So you have paintings you spend a year on and paintings you spend 3 days on.
Yeah.
That's very
But once I had done the printout, then yeah, 4
But
days.
there's also an inversion that historically oils take a long, long time, and
Yeah.
acrylics are fast.
Yeah, that's
This
funny.
is a very interesting thing for me, just technically.
Yeah, usually you'd say, well, I had to wait for it to dry. I had to wait for it to dry.
But I think it means that you understand the properties and you can do what you want with it.
I'm learning.
Got a favorite? Any closing remarks?
Do I have a favorite?
The only favorite that I have is the big piece of art that it's over there. It's just absolutely incredibly intense. The color is just exquisite. I'm like, wow. It's like she is like, playing around with the earth, the flame, and the air, the water. It's just, there's something very, very spiritual about those colors.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely unbelievable. I just love this piece that is back there.
Thank you.
It's just incredible. It's like, by looking at these pieces, like, these are like computerized. I mean, I'm looking at them so closely, I'm like, she's got such an incredible patience with this.
Yes.
It's great that you had these comments about that, since you weren't here then, because you're saying things that nobody else
No,
actually said or saw.
Yeah.
The patient is gotta be, it's, you go with the flow with your patience, and you just let out what's naturally comes out of, what's flow out of your hands. It's like you have this surge of energy, let it take its course, let it create. It's like you're bringing that inner spirit, that inner beauty out of you. It's just amazing. But these, it's just like amazing. These are absolutely amazing. I'm an artist myself. I do illustrated artwork, which is I do pencil work, and it takes me about 2 weeks for me to get one piece done because it's all in details. And I remember I did a sort of like a show in one of the galleries in Newbury Street, and I had successfully sold 6 of them in one day, and I was like, I'm totally overwhelmed because I had like displayed like 12 pieces of artwork, and it took me like pretty good 2 months for me to get all 12 pieces of artwork and all in pencil work. It was just really intense, but I guess the hard work really pays off. It really does pays off, but it's just incredible.
Well, you might have missed the artist had commented on the fact that the bigger pieces you're talking about were like a year of solid work, each one of them. So talk about hard work.
Wow. It really...
So I didn't want you to get the answer on these like 3 days and not know that there's the
3 days is not
12
really
months.
that though, because I mean...
No, this is the speed demon side of
This is
Caitlin.
Caitlin obsessive. that we
Right,
all
this is
know.
Caitlin like, I got the show laid out and I don't know what's going on the
Try not to be
front wall. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, the other, can I comment, because there's a really good comment you made, and I wanted to personally wait till we sort of came through the work, because I didn't want to prematurely say it. The thing I do think that's very interesting about the first piece, and this is terribly personal, but Caitlin always has this, this is very physical, but this is radiance that actually is in her personality, since we're a family here. And it's this skin and radiance, actually, and it's about becoming. And that particular piece, in terms of autobiographical pieces, has that quality. And I like that you let yourself do that, because it's there. There's this glow that's coming out. It's your color. It's
You're willing to
Caitlin
admit
running out of the bathroom.
alter
It's
ego
there.
phrase.
Oh no! But it is. It's that scrubbed kind of becoming, and there's that piece that it's very hard. You can't consciously do it. Comes out. But I think that piece does have it appropriately to this body of work too. Is that?
That's a really very.
That's an
very-
excellent
Yeah,
place for us to let you off the
Thank you so much.
hook. Thank you. And I tell you, he's not a ringer. I didn't tell him to come in and say that. So.
I'm pretty nervous.
Oh, yeah. She's just.